Been a little bit of time, but welcome back to another Fix It Friday. Today we are taking a look at a PlayStation 1. This one comes to us not reading discs properly or not playing games. So we'll test it out and just make sure. I also, for the PS1s, if it's not reading discs, what I like to do is try a test game and then also working with a CD. So we'll go ahead and do that first and test it out. But let's take a look over the system. This is actually a black developer kit. This is kind of sought after here. This isn't an actual paint job. This is how it actually came for the developers. It's a standard PS1. The main differences is going to be all your ports in the back here. You can take a look. You have the standard RCA jacks here, your AV output, and then your serial port. This is standard for most PS1s. There are some variations and that kind of thing. But it's a really cool color. I mean, even inside the disc tray, you got the black. So it's a really cool housing. I always like this one. But let's go ahead and start by testing it out and then determining if the issue could be the disc, laser, or what. So basically we'll need power, and we'll get our AV. I like to start here with no disc in. Just to hear if I can hear the laser. I can't hear anything going. I'm actually going to turn it off. And let's go ahead and let's go throw in a game. Yeah, you can hear it clicking. Let's try that one more time. Let's see if we can hear it. Yeah, and the disc isn't actually moving either, so there's that. And it's just booting up to the main disc menu here. Same thing. I can hear it clicking, but I can't see the disc, or I can't feel the disc. So it's something to do with the actual disc drive itself. So let's go ahead and start by getting it fully disassembled, and then we'll go from there. Just like on the normal PlayStations, it's going to be 5 screws here, and that'll get into it. Pop off the top, just like that. And I already see our issue here. Can you spot the issue? All right. So this looks like it got desoldered off the board. It's going to be connected right here. And it's kind of interesting because there's a ton of solder right there. So I'm wondering if our customer tried to solder it on himself. So let's go ahead and power on my wow, let me start that again. I'm gonna go ahead and power on my soldering iron. We'll get it all warmed up here. I'm gonna go ahead and clean up all this solder first, and then we'll look at the pads, see if they need to be fixed or anything, and then we'll re-tin them and then get this connector back into place. Yeah, that's gonna be your main issue. The lens itself, I don't know if you could see it, but it's a little dull looking. It's not as shiny. So that's probably going to need a cleaning anyways. So we'll go ahead and do that as well. But yeah, let's go ahead and start with this and go from there. Start by adding a little flux to all these pads here. And I got a little bit of solder wick here. And then I'm just going to lay it right on top. As soon as I get my line here. And just being really, really careful to get it in there. Let me try to get a better angle here. So one thing you want to keep in mind is when you're working with your solder wick here, this is actually the braid's gonna heat up pretty good. So I wouldn't recommend getting into a space where you feel like you're laying it against any of these ribbons or anything, because it's possible that this is gonna heat up hot enough and it's gonna start melting parts, any plastic parts, I should say. But yeah, so just be mindful of that. I also keep my 2 fingers here on the edge, just so I know how hot the end is getting. If it's getting super, super hot, then I'm gonna readjust and make sure I'm not hitting anything else. Looks like those pads are just fine. And so these are the main connectors right here. And then off to the side, you have the 2 anchor solder joints right here on the left and right side. I'm going to take that off as well. And while I'm doing this, I'm also being really mindful of where my my soldering iron is. If you're resting it against anything, you got a possibility of touching any wires that are plastic, melting those, or getting any of the components knocked off as well. So yeah, now that that's good, let's go ahead and clean that up. We'll just do a little bit of IPA and just make sure those are good. Looks like all the pads are perfectly fine. Here's the connector here that we have. I'm going to go ahead and just take a look at this and just make sure everything's okay. Visually, it looks fine. It just looks like they must have come off desoldered. I'm guessing, I'm really guessing that the customer tried to solder it back on, but if you saw it before, it was a solder blob all over all 4 of those pads. So it wouldn't have made a difference if you got it connected, because all 4 of these pads are not going to be shorted together like that, and hopefully there was no issues in doing that. Yeah, I'm really hoping that we're not gonna have any burnt out components, but we won't really know until we get the actual new or the same connector put back into place. So next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is just tin up all these pads back in, and then we'll go ahead and clean this guy up and get it going. Kind of same thing in reverse. I'm just putting a little bit of flux, that way the solder will stick to the pads. And I'm not going to add too much. I'm just going to add a little bit. So I actually like to start it. I just put a little bit on the tip here. And to clean up the connector, I'm just going to add a little bit of flux to each one of these pins. And then I'm going to go ahead and start with my solder wick and then try to wick away anything that was excess on that. Being really careful because the surrounding areas of the connector are all plastic. Just adding a little bit of solder to each one of the legs. As you can see, I'm still working on my skills here. And we're just going to start touching those legs one by one. Heating up those pads just so that they get connected. And then I like to stick the tweezers right down the center and then add a lot more pressure and then really touch those legs just to make sure that they're making good contact with the board. And then finally you want to just hit those anchor points. Cool. All right. Once it's good, Let's go ahead and put the connector back in, and we'll go ahead and power on and test. And actually, before we test, I actually lied. I really do want to clean that lens just to make sure that it's clean as well. So we're going to take a little bit of IPA. Clean that guy up. All right, and let's test. All right, good news is we actually got a spin, so we're probably gonna have to adjust that laser. All right, so I decreased the amount of resistance. It was at 616 or 626, and I decreased it down to 496. So let's go ahead and give it a try. Perfect. Yep, it's picking up right away. I don't hear that clicking noise anymore. If you could hear the clicking noise previously, that's an indication that the laser is just too weak. That's the normal sound there. It's going around the disc and getting into certain spots, and then it's loading it into the RAM. And we're just getting a perfect video here, so. Looks good. Thanks for joining me on another Fix It Friday. I'm going to go ahead and just clean this guy all the way up and then get it all done. And yeah, the customer should be all good to go. Cool. Well, check out any of my other videos if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I'm going to try from now on to start putting out these ones every Friday. I've got a couple of different videos coming up as well. So we'll catch you guys later.